I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the lands of all Kamina speaking people, specifically the Farmington Village. The Board of Education is honored to be able to collaboratively walk beside the Cowichan, Malahats, Basses, Malone, and Ellicott Kamina Kayak people who have cared for this land for thousands of years. May we walk gently on the ceded and unceded territories of their lands as we work together to lift up all the Ha-Ha-Smena.
Motion to adopt the agenda, please. Moved by Trustee BEBC, seconded by Trustee Sousa.
All those in favor? Thank you. Nothing in education, Mr. Sandquist, 2025-2026 annual budget, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a comprehensive budget presentation this evening, which is on the agenda, and that relates to the 25-26 annual budget. On your desktops, you'll see some supporting documents in a format that the board are familiar with. It's a way to walk through the opening budget position to a potential balanced final budget position. Attached to this are individual notes that add more detail and context to the items that I'm going to speak about, but I'll be speaking about them almost exactly the same way that the notes are presenting, but they're there for you to take home with you and to have available to read along with if you so choose. So this is a PowerPoint, and we do have a trustee online who's going to text in questions if they come up. But I'll begin by loading and sharing my presentation.
All right, so Mr. Sandquist will do note for questions, just so we don't stay to there.
Okay, I am waiting for my nice slideshow, and here we go. So welcome to my presentation on the 25-26 annual budget at the Special Board Education and Business Committee meeting of April 8, 2025. I'm going to begin by a quick review of the board's 2025-2026 budget guiding principles. And those have been designed to basically guide this process around how to make decisions on balancing the budget within the board's priorities. So as a reminder, these are the budget guiding principles to align the decisions with Strategic Plan 2530. That is the new strategic plan. Develop as a mechanism to aid in reconciliation, intentionally target funds toward resources aimed at increasing Indigenous student graduation rates, develop on the principles of equity, must be developed in a transparent process and include public and partner input through communication, consultation, and reporting back. And the board has done a lot of work so far around that input, and it's now hopefully reflected in some of the recommendations that you'll see in front of you. Account for economic uncertainties. Of course, there's regulatory requirements to comply with the School Act, the collective agreements, and board policy. At the end of this presentation, there'll be some multi-year implications of decisions and forecasting. And we look at balancing short-term and long-term priorities. There is a one-time proposal in this budget presentation, and maintaining an appropriate contingency balance, where we'll look at what the balance will be after utilizing some potential contingency to balance this budget surplus. So a reminder of the 4 priorities. Learning and Indigenous ways of knowing have rolled over with some new comments. Individual and collective well-being replaced culture of care, which I am referencing in some sections of the budget where decisions were made previously under those priorities, and then caring for place has replaced future-focused systems. So there's a friendly reminder of the 4 priorities. And I want to spend just a moment here on Administrative Procedure 412. The board has, or actually I guess the superintendent has, an administrative procedure on what to do in periods of diminishing financial resources, which is where we find ourselves as a district due to declining enrollment and due to cost escalation and due to years of not receiving funding for those cost escalations. So when that occurs, there are two principles. One, to maintain the highest quality of education services, paramount goal. Even though this at times requires the district's greatest efforts to preserve programs the district deems indispensable and/or add new programs which may become important. And the second one is the provision of the highest reasonable level of job security for our staff shall be the district's second goal, though that goal must be inevitably tempered by the district determination to respect the rights and needs of students. So hang on to that one, because I think as we go through the budget, the presentation here, we attempted in preparing this to honor those two principles. I talked in earlier budget presentation about uncertainty, economic uncertainty being a major issue for the board. And that's somewhat stability. We are in a bargaining cycle as well, so I wouldn't just say it's all economic uncertainty. We also have stability issues, like what will happen with collective bargaining provincially, and especially we're active with 3 of our union groups right now. And then cost pressures continue to exceed funding increases. So those are sort of the big messages, things we know. So far, the board has been active in engaging the community. The board updated priorities to strategic plan, Beyond Education Strategic Plan 2025-2030. The board established the 25-26 budget guiding principles, held many liaison meetings with DSAC, Indigenous Student Leadership Groups, CVTF, USW, CUPE, PVPA, because that's CV, PVPA, and DPAC. There was a budget survey. There was a public feedback meeting that was attended this year. And then there was information that you have been receiving since about January on budget things we think are going to happen, the things that actually happened, and the financial position of the budget for 25-26. At the last board meeting, we reviewed the ministry funding announcement, changes in the operating revenues, changes in the operating expenses. We talked about the assumptions used to create the opening budget position, such as there are no wage increases built into this budget because bargaining hasn't concluded and we don't know if there are going to be, or what they will be, and how they'll be funded. And an updated surplus reconciliation. There was a financial projection based on February that was presented, February 28th that was presented, and I updated it today, and I'll reference it as we move through. Also, we're going to present a list of options at this meeting. We are going to invite you to provide feedback or any other recommendations, and there are 2 primary special purpose funds that I'd like to review with the committee. So at the board meeting last week, there was an opening budget shortfall of $3,966,535,000. That occurred as expected expenditures exceeded expected revenues. And so unconfirmed, will there be any future wage increases, and what will those look like, and will they be funded? Not in the budget. We showed you some significant cost escalation around extended health and dental benefit rates. They were the preliminary estimates by the benefit provider. We have used those in building the budget. They could be different when they're finalized. We also don't have our 2026 WorkSafe BC demerits, so we're banking on the 2025 either going down or holding steady. Also, we are making the assumption that the Bank of Canada will continue to decrease interest rates. And in economic uncertainty, that may or may not be the case. They may hold, they may go up. Who knows how the government will react to trade tariffs and other pressures on the economy. And that global inflation and economic certainty will not affect enrollment of international student program. Actually, in speaking with my spouse, who's just been off on a recruiting trip, Canada is very popular right now with Europe in regards to the options south of the border as a place to send your child. So don't know that's going to be a risk factor now. The opening shortfall already factored in some adjustments. There was teacher staff this year in the 24-25 that were not able to be recovered when this sudden enrollment drop happened. So they have been recovered. There are also FTE-driven staffing levels. So there's an additional number of teachers that typically go down on 136 FTE. So think of about a class size of 20. There's another 6 somewhat FTE teachers that you're just naturally dropping because your student population has dropped. And it goes up when student population goes up. Same is true of education assistants. We tend to have a typical ratio on how they're budgeted for. The early budget or projections showed a drop in designations, predominantly level 2s at this time, which basically means there's more graduating than are coming in. And so there's been that adjustment made already. And there's one school that we've already made a clerical adjustment on due to enrollment numbers. So just so you're aware, rather than overstating the shortfall and then having these reductions come later, which are almost, they're formula driven, we took them right off the top. Okay. This list is here as these are some really great things that the board have put additional funding towards over the last number of years, the previous board and this board. And they're under the prior strategic plan, priorities as to how they were originally adopted. I'm not going to read them all. You have them in your package, but we're going to go to some of these in ways to potentially balance the budget. So going back to those principles around preserving programs and services for kids, and going back to those principles around trying to protect wages and jobs. Most of these that we've gone to do not affect jobs, but they are more in the supply realm, services realm. And I'll get to those. But as a reminder, those are initiatives. This is what we opened with, and this is an information slide, again, not to fully read it, but we opened the budget with 851.7 FTE in the operating budget. So this was after making the reductions to teachers and education assistants and a little bit of clerical. This is where we start our budget position. So $73 million in salaries, 5.5 in substitutes, 5.6 in substitutes, 20.5 in benefits, and then services and supplies totaling $10,800,000. So we began with an operating budget of $110,272, and that needs to go down. Our revenues need to go up to come up with the $4 million approximately that we're short. So budgeting within a shortfall, and that happens when your expenditures exceed your revenues, and there are really 3 strategies to use to balance the budget. Utilize prior year surplus. That effectively increases your revenue. It doesn't last forever. You can reduce your expenditures or try to find ways to increase your revenues. So the last 2 years, revenues naturally went up on interest because the Bank of Canada rates were so high. And we had a lot of funding that was sitting in our bank account for the construction project across the way. So there's been a lot of feedback that the board have received on suggestions and areas where the budget could be enhanced. Not a lot of suggestions on areas where the budget could be reduced, but we're going to go through the journey on how we can potentially balance this shortly. The case for maintaining a staffing contingency. So I talked about on last week, how the district is now in funding protection. And what that does is that guarantees that the board does not receive on September to September less than 98.5% of what the prior year's funding was. So it cushions the blow in a rapid decline. That's the idea. So the board is going to receive right now about $793,000 in supplemental funding protection. Okay. But what that means is that if there's another student that arrives that would normally generate $9,000, no funding comes in. That $793,000 goes down by $9,000. And you keep having to pay it back until it's paid back, and then you get those additional funds. So this budget that is before you, when we have done our preliminary staffing on particularly in regards to teacher allocations, there is still a contingency here of about $500,000. And that is really important because if we're not right and it's not down 136, and all of a sudden this summer everybody decides to move to the Cowichan Valley and their numbers are higher, where does that money come from? You've already balanced a budget. You have no new money for those, the employees needed to support those staff. There is a contingency contained in this budget. We may do things as staff look to find ways to allocate that teacher staffing and that principal staffing to increase that contingency. And I've just put an example here, such as looking at the admin time at a really, really small school. Some of our schools are starting to shrink significantly. That would increase contingency, not be a budget savings, but be a contingency booster in the event that it's needed. And if it's not needed, it just goes into surplus for the next year, which helps you down the road. So the budget has a contingency embedded in it without the surplus being the contingency. Just wanted that to be really, really clear. And this is the pots where we're looking as we look to balance the budget. You can see there's, if you go blue to blue, corner of blue to corner of blue, down to the bottom, that's all the wages and benefits, 90.2% of the budget. And you can see where we have utilities and supplies and services listed. And you can't find $4 million in the small part of the pie, I guess is what I'm saying, is that, you know, we need to look elsewhere, and that is where we're going to start. So this is where questions might come up. This is where your sheets that were provided to you are going to be walked through. The notes numbers are not on my presentation, but if you, they're in order. They're in order, okay? So we have begun with a $3,966,000 shortfall. Talked about that last week. That's where the board knows they're starting. Revenue options. This number is not by mistake. It is $2,354,176 at this time exactly of surplus appropriation of the 24-25. And I'll reconcile that for you later as to what that looks like. But what you have before you here is a budget that potentially balances using $2,354,176, which is less than last year, and which is less than how we ended this year, which was at about 2.9 because of the enrollment drop. Okay. The second item was we hadn't yet picked up the Integrated Child and Youth Care Grant, but we had a lot of the expenses tied to that program. It should have been in the opening position, and I missed it, and I'm putting it in now. That's about all I can say about that. Is the opening position, like, we should have come at 3.6-ish, not at 3.9-ish. I found it, and we're corrected it. So doing that, budget after revenue options, we're looking to find $1.183 million. And here's the areas that we're going to be looking at. Number one, this is a difficult one to explain. This is a difficult concept because it saves money on the operating budget, but it doesn't actually reduce any staffing in the schools. And I know that sounds odd. When there are two pots of money for teacher staffing. One is called our operating budget, where we budget based on what the board can afford in the operating budget, following the rules that are in place prior to the restoration of the teacher collective agreement. So we might rethink the period between 2002 and 2015. Enrolling in class was set by the School Act, but the board had full discretion over how you decided, how many librarians you decided you wanted, how many resource teachers, how many LA, how much counseling time, and how much English language learner time. Okay, that was a time frame. So from 2002 to 2015, boards couldn't do whatever they wanted on class size. That was fixed in the School Act. Could do whatever you wanted with the ratios. The next phase is 2015 forward to now, where now you have restored teacher collective agreement language that tells you both of those pots. What you have to do as a board, you have to have a certain class size for enrolling, and you have to have certain ratios in place for non-enrolling, the library, the bits. The difference in between those government funds and a fund called Classroom Enhancement Fund. Have you heard us talk about the extra $10 million, the extra 80 teachers? We have never, in the period from 2015 to today, looked at balancing off those ratios, but the board had discretion on previously, which you can do for the purposes of calculating your CEF calculation. So when times are tough, if you, in the absence of restored teacher collective agreement language, would the board have had to have looked at their library ratios, for instance? You might have. You might have said that library is a different priority than, I'm using that one as an example, so I'm not attacking library, I'm just using that as an example. You would have had discretion to have made a decision around it that you don't have on what's actually in the classroom. So that $468,000 is a reallocation between the board paying for it and the Classroom Enhancement Fund paying for it, because you need to adjust your ratios to balance this budget, and those are not fixed by what has been bargained, and we have conferred with the ministry on this reduction. So it sounds like a freebie. It doesn't affect staffing. It's a funding mechanism, and it's complex. It probably takes whiteboard. If we need a board planning session to understand it, I'm happy to do it. But I think I probably just need to leave it at that. Nobody loses a job. There's no reduction in librarians at the end of the day. A special purpose fund will pay for more than the operating budget. That's probably the easiest way to explain it.
It's a positive.
Yeah. We're moving into considering reducing our snow removal contract, and what happened this year is the operations department and grounds department successfully were able to handle the snow removal responsibilities for the school district. So 2 vehicles were equipped with blades and sanders, and typically the board will pay between we have a budget of $75,000. In a bad snow year, you may have paid over $100,000 to a contractor. Now that's just done through overtime and fuel. We are looking at the possibility of a 3rd vehicle through some remaining funding in this year's snow removal budget that didn't get spent because of the good work of our own crew. We won't need to contract those services out with a 3rd vehicle. So we can take that contract budget, take it down, and just leave $15,000 for the overtime for our own staff to do the snow removal. So that was a really great initiative of the operations department, and it's going to have long-term savings. Any questions on that one? Nope. The next one is in relation to summer work. This is a 50% reduction on work that some teachers have available to them in the summer. It's not a common offering in many other school districts. And so we're looking at starting to pull that back. That budget back. So it is a bonus work that we want to reduce in half, and I'll leave it at that.
Trustee Suzanne.
Can you ask questions as we go?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so can you elaborate a little bit more on what kind of summer work teachers?
Is predominantly extra time for counseling and resource. A lot of school districts will do that work that happens in the summertime during the regular school year. So it is an ask for those positions to do that work within the regular school, half of that work within the regular school year, and still have some summer opportunity.
Trustee Lise and then Trustee Struck.
So is that some of our vulnerable students who get to come in a little bit early? Is it that program?
If you don't mind, I could refer either to the superintendent or to my colleagues behind me. Or we would prefer to
I think we'll go with the assistant superintendents
Okay.
who are really summer work.
Hold on, if I speak with the council, So the counselors in this district traditionally have used some of June and some of July to balance timetables and finish up the timetables. Other districts do that work much earlier, so that in May and June, the balancing of the timetables are completed. And then in August, the counselors are working with new registrations or children that have changed what they want to do long-term, whether it be post-secondary for trades or post-secondary for academics and universities. So we've backed up our timelines to accommodate that. So our principals are right now, the target is to have the timetables finished by the end of April so that all that work can be done ahead of time. Do you want to speak to the resource teachers, please?
And with the resource teachers, this past fall was the first time that our elementary resource teachers came in for one day. So we'll reduce that a little bit. Again, we're also actually on Thursday working with our resource teacher to start proactively planning transitions and building programming. So we're going to be doing that work throughout the spring. On the other side of that, we're also with Ready, Set, Learn and our learning budget, increasing some other transitional learning opportunities for our vulnerable learners. So we think the students will be well served, even though we're looking at doing this differently.
Trustee Strachan.
And would that be a negative for the teachers union? Would they see that as a?
It's not in contract,
Okay,
and they are aware of it.
okay.
We've had a conversation.
They were consulted on that sort of thought?
They're aware that we're in a situation where we have to look at doing things differently.
Okay.
So yes, we've spoken about it.
Yeah, the alternatives are moving into FTE. This is extra or a regular assignment, and so we're looking at items that don't remove people, but maybe extra. The extra hours are an area that we could look at for a reduction. Trying to remain within that second principle.
Just this, in the spring, we also do bridging IEPs, which Darlene can add to, which is again a different practice where we're really looking to support the vulnerable students or students that have diverse abilities or disabilities early, so the transition is smoother. And what else would we talk about?
Well, I think with the bridging we're not referring to it necessarily as bridging IEPs, but we're going to be drafting the IEPs for the fall and the spring with the teams who know children best. So they're in place. That also then will empower our teachers to be with children in September, October, as opposed to be focused on paperwork layers.
Actually, that's a good idea. Mr. Sadquist.
And perhaps a bit of a preview as we move through these reductions. There were mental health dollars and inclusive ed dollars and those types of supports. We have not gone to those budgets. Just giving you that as a preview. If you're wondering if they, the things you're discussing, those are still there and intact. Like we had your assessment dollars, your mental health supports. We haven't recommended any changes to those. So just a preview, because that may be where you're starting to think about some of those summer services and those assessment services.
Actually, Trustee Croft just sent me a text on that. So
Okay, did I answer that?
thank you for answering that.
Okay, just a preview. It's coming up in one of the later slides. The next one here, the district currently has about $500,000 worth of department heads, which is 35 department heads spread over the secondary system. We're looking at, I don't want to call it right sizing, but aligning that more consistently with levels in other school districts, which would be to move from 35 to 28. They're all expiring this year, so it would just be a restructuring of those positions at the schools. There's stipends and release time. So it's about a $9,000 lift of pay, and then 10 days or $5,000 worth of release time. So that's what that one is. The next one here, as you compress a system and you have fewer classrooms open, because we will drop approximately probably between 12 and 15 teachers overall, some in the operating budget and some in the classroom enhancement fund. You lock those doors of those unused classrooms and you don't have to clean them. And this is a typical strategy used in periods of decline, that you will right size, all your staffing starts to get sized to the amount of space that you're utilizing, and you're shrinking.
And we have done that in the past when our budgets are tight. We just lock classrooms so that schools don't spread out into empty space.
Yeah, it's nice to use that. You have an art room, but we would say you can't have your art room. You have to still stay within the spaces of your. Yeah, it's actually quite a challenge, because space is a premium, and it is
I have a question from trustee Cross. Presumably QSS is not affected by this?
Not at this time, it's at full capacity.
With downsizing of schools and classrooms, years ago, that's when preschools used to be able to come in and rent space. I remember Maple Bay, we had a preschool that came in there. Does that open up doors for revenue for empty classroom space, or is that?
Yeah, those are typically done on cost recovery per ministry direction, so we wouldn't say they're a revenue generator. But if those classrooms are reopened, that custodial time gets recovered by the operator, and then that we don't have that reduction. Like what it does is it offsets some of those. And I expect, given the Minister Bear's mandate letter around before and after school care, that there will be encouragement to utilize spaces around the province. We're not going to be the only school district in a declining enrollment situation, and a lot of that is showing up in the elementary schools and the primary grades. Of course, it's the birth rate. So elementary schools are going to see capacity as we move forward, and there will be those opportunities.
Trustee Thorne?
I'm having a hard time moving past summer work. I need to get, if you can, more information, because we went so hard with COVID and everything else with mental health. We've got a lot of kids with special needs, and I've got 2 living in my house, and I know how challenging that is to have people or counselors work with them. So I'm just sort of stymied there.
Trustee Thorne, can I get you some clarification? What I think I heard the Assistant Superintendent Olson say was that wasn't counseling for students with maybe some need, but more timetable counseling.
Yeah.
So that probably is not the same as what you're concerned about, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that with you.
The next item here is employee replacement costs. Looking at this budget area this afternoon, still showing around a $25,000 projected surplus at the end of the year on replacement costs. So that is a lot of surplus, and I think what we're seeing is, we had pre-COVID trends on absenteeism. Then we had post-COVID trends on absenteeism, and we're starting to see a little more of that normalization around leaves and leave replacements. But there are some other options to look at here as well, around the necessity of replacing every employee on day one, for instance. And we'll be looking at some strategies to perhaps look at some of the non-enrolling or clerical areas where maybe if there's 5 clerical in a school, you don't have to replace everybody on the first day, or maybe the librarian doesn't have to be replaced on the first day. I mean, there's things we can look at that we have done in the past when times were tighter, and they were put back in when times were better. So we're kind of going back into the old records and looking at how we managed declining enrollment in the past. But anyway, we're $325,000 in surplus, and that appears to be an area that we can address, or at least take a reduction on. This was a bit of a gift.
Trustee Susan?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So there's 325,000 in surplus. Why only remove 100,000 from that?
Well, it still remains one of the board's only risk contingencies, and it can go the opposite. What if trends return back to why I would be concerned about that one going too far in this particular year is it's a job action year, which could have some labor stress on individuals who are projecting that, if we don't know, we don't have a crystal ball but we know that if there are, when things get difficult in provincial collective agreement negotiations, that can be very stressful as people think about, are we going to be on strike, or are we going to be walking out? What does that mean for supporting the students I work with? What does that mean for my income? And you can see absenteeism trends around those cycle years go up a little bit. So I would be hesitant to go too far, just due to that uncertainty. The next item was a gift from Premier Eby, and that is the elimination, a financial gift, not necessarily an environmental gift, but a financial gift from Premier Eby on the BC carbon tax elimination, which saves the board. You have a significant diesel budget, about $400,000 a year, and that's 17 cents a liter. As well, you pay about $335,000 a year in natural gas. So there's some savings on those two tied directly to that came in after our original budget position. That one is a freebie. The next one here, when the previous director of communications left, there was a short-term contract where that individual was left on the books. And now those duties have all transitioned to assistant superintendent, and we believe we can take that small item out. Any questions on that one? Okay, this is the next one. This isn't your attendance at conferences, and you may or may not even have known you had this, but trustees have not accessed this budget since it was created probably 4 years ago, and it was a Pro-D budget for over and above the BC STA activities. So if you had a deep area of desired learning, there was $1,100 per trustee. As it hasn't been used, I have just put it on the list.
And you know about it. I'm sorry.
So when we did trustee orientation, that was actually brought up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is-
It was trustee Lise.
And if we're seeing giving up in different places all over the district, this is a really good one to say, you know, we'll give up things to.
Page 2. This one was an add-on last year. And we don't put this one on here as a service reduction to the Indigenous learners. And you'll see in my note that currently the unexpended targeted funds has been increasing over the last few years and is currently projected to be about $700,000 under expended at the end of this year. We believe we need to catch up on that, and when that's caught up, come back to put this back in, because you're not spending the dollars where the board is, not the board, are you? The system is not able to fully spend the targeted dollars at this point, so this budget is not being expended. We need to spend those targeted dollars and come back to this at a later date, I believe. That is why it's here. Not to reduce services to anybody, because the services are intact, but simply to, it's one of the ones, if you're not using it, if it's not being utilized yet, come back to it at a later time when you have spent all the targeted dollars and put it back in then. That's what we're suggesting.
Trustee Sousa?
Thank you. So that's been the case over the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years?
Longer.
Longer. Okay.
Yeah, it ebbs and flows. It gets almost caught up, and then something happens, and it doesn't. And sometimes it's just worker supply within the fund itself, where you budget with an aggressive budget for a certain number of employees, and then you can't find the employees, or a certain amount of cultural activities, and then they don't happen, or a certain amount of elder visits, and they don't all happen. So there's always a really solid, good, supportive plan. And just circumstances, it's kind of like the sick leave, sometimes it just doesn't get spent. In the last few years, it's been creeping up a bit, and I think, it needs to come down before adding anything to the budget. So we're not talking about eliminating any services, catching up on those that are already in place.
Trustee Sousa, I did ask about that one too, because I was a little bit nervous, because I know that, Cowichan Secondary is going to have a robust program in the Salmonella. And I know that we built an elders lounge so that we have elders in that room and working around the clock with kids. When I spoke to the superintendent, thank goodness he let me call him on a Sunday. Secretary Treasurer. He said that we could look at this and put it back if we need it. So I felt quite comfortable with this line, because I know that we as a board can come back for once that program, the cultural component of QSS is running. Trustee Strachan.
And so from your note, there's still 600K in there?
600 to 700K, yeah. We project to be under expended at the end of this year on the last forecast. I was, if I put 600 in there, it was
Well, it
actually,
said 700K.
yeah,
So I took the
Yeah.
100 out.
yes.
Wow.
You just won't be adding.
That's a lot of money.
The next one here, again, times are tougher. 21st century learning furniture. The reason we put this on here, and I'll give you the rationale. It's been a great fund, and we've also been in a position of growth where we've been needing to buy furniture. So buy furniture that's of a 21st century nature. You know, schools have grown, they filled their classrooms, they've had to come, and we've had to expand and buy furniture. That we're now in a period of compression, and there is a school full of furniture, much of which was bought under the 21st Century Learning Grant over at Cowichan Secondary that needs to be dispersed and gone through. So we feel comfortable that we'll have some furniture options just over at the building because the new school got entirely new furniture, and there's furniture for 1,000 students across the street, and we'll go in there and have a really good look at it. So we think this is one that can, again, try to stay away from people and services and programs. Again, I know they're all everything on here is great and wanted and needed. This is why budgeting is hard.
Trustee Thorne?
Didn't the students themselves say that they didn't want new furniture?
At the new school?
Yes. This is going back over a year ago. When we first started talking about the new high school, that was one of the questions. And they weren't concerned about furniture as they were about computers and stuff like that.
I'm not sure. They definitely all got new furniture.
They wanted new furniture.
It's quite impressive.
That's Randy.
No, they wanted new furniture, yeah. Yeah.
I have another question.
Oh, sorry, Trustee Elise.
I don't know, this may have been discussed before too, but with all of the surplus that, I mean, whatever can be used will be used, but is there a means to sell it? Like anywhere, anything that's usable, or is there an opportunity to?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not going to be a ton of money, but I just wonder if we can save the environment.
Well, there'll be a point that everything the system needs will be out of the building, and there will still be furniture left, and there will still be lockers left, and we'll come and likely have a conversation around what do we do now with it? Do we? I know that the director of operations is already receiving requests from outside organizations around getting lockers. Everybody sees the lockers as, you know, if we were to put out, we have lockers for sale, or we have lockers for donation, they would go to mechanic shops and sports clubs and potential other organizations. Like I know there would be demand for a lot of what's in that building. We just haven't had that plan that far out yet.
Mm-hmm. And we did actually have some lockers from Stanley Gordon when that was closed that was used in a couple of movie sets. So it happens, but we're just not there yet. Superintendent,
Thank
sorry.
you, through you, Chair. I wonder if Assistant Superintendent Rowan or Director of Operations Robinson might speak to the work that's being done in terms of inventory and distribution of materials from that school to schools.
Yes, so with Jason mentioned the 21st Century Learning Grant before, part of what we were able to do this year already is meet all the requests for different types of furniture, because we were in the process of sending out the chairs and desks to the other schools. We're also sending out the weight room to Lake Cowichan School. The metal shop is going out to Lake Cowichan School. Aaron Henry's heading up the team going over to Cowichan Secondary. They're also currently taking all the technology out of the room, like TVs and whatnot. Those are coming over here for use later, so we'll store them. And all the usable desk and furniture are going to be stacked, wrapped, and in the hallway, so that in August we're going to put it out to all the schools again. Do you need any replacement furniture? And that'll go out. So we're hoping to use all the usable stuff. We even talked about using some of you know Cowichan had pretty new windows put in not long ago, so the blinds are in good shape. So this, as an example, if it's worth it with the carpenters, taking down the blinds and then actually have those ready to go to other schools as well. So trying to strip everything out before we sell it.
We'll repurpose everything, including line wash stations, mixing valves, lens covers, absolutely everything that we could use in another school will be stripped out, stored, and itemized so we can save money going forward in terms of replacement on other schools. So there won't be much left to that school by the time we're done with it.
Probably will save us more. It'll probably be more beneficial to us financially doing that than trying to sell it at a reduced cost, actually, because we'll be using it.
The next item, there was $50,000 in the budget for strategic plan implementation put in on the original strategic plan. Most of those initiatives are already underway now. We believe we can access that budget. The strategic plan did not change that dramatically, that it needs another refresh of cycle. So we're going to recommend the removal of those funds. Investigations, the board, from time to time have legal costs or outside individuals or organizations required to conduct investigations, typically into employee matters. And after a couple of years of significant years, this year has been a lot better, but we also have staff members that are becoming trained in investigations. So there are times when they're not, they're a matter that needs an investigation, but you don't always have to have an external individual do it. And so we think we can drop that budget by $20,000. That's why that one's there. Okay. This one is in your note. There are two components to School Messenger. One is safe arrival, in full use, and everybody loves it. The other part of it is the actual communication part of School Messenger, which is not being used because the capacity exists within MyEd, within the student information system. So we're paying for a component of the software which is not being utilized. So what we're saying is the exact same functionality exists with MyEd that's already covered off by the province of British Columbia. We don't want to lose the safe arrival. That we know, we've heard from families, and DPAC is a very important service. So this is just to take the messenger component out and reduce cancel that part of the service. Doesn't change the way we heard from DPAC very clearly in our consultations about communication and parent communication. The next one, there's a lot of acronyms that the tech department use, so I'm not going to try to explain exactly what this is, but there are revisions being made to the district's network security and the software that's being utilized. A new program is going to be used versus the old one. We do have a question from Trustee Croft after this. So we do have potential savings of about $45,000 on that software. And the request from the tech department is to maintain half of those savings for hardware, as cost escalations are starting to impact computers and laptops and iPads, for instance. So this is one where the savings is going to occur, but we're not recommending taking the entire savings.
She would like to know how much is left in investigations after the cut.
In combination with legal, $120,000. It's blended, it was 140. So this is approximately, what is that, a 15% reduction? Okay, thank you. Here's another one. We had a single line item in there when TV installations were starting to overwhelm the maintenance department. Again, this isn't a job, but it was extra hours for that. We don't believe this is going to be easy to accomplish, but we believe that within the existing maintenance function, those televisions that are being installed in classrooms will need to be covered off. The next one is average teacher salary adjustment. So I showed the board last week that increments, we basically take everybody in the budget. So we budget on individuals. So our budget program has every employee in it, what they earn, what benefits they have. So whether they have a single family or dual health benefit coverage, what pension plan they belong to, what their CPP rates are going to be in WorkSafe, and it builds each individual in, as their own budget. So we have that information by person. So we take everybody we have right now and we roll them forward into next year and we increment everybody. And when it comes to teachers, those increments went up by about $900,000. So boom, 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 boom. Everybody's going up and they're getting their masters and their new wages are in. But we will have retirements. And those retirees will be replaced with things that cost $40,000 less. You go from a 610, which is a 6 means you have a master's and you've got the maximum experience, to a 5-1 or a 5-2 or a 5-3, and there's a significant salary differential. We also naturally have employees go off on leave and are replaced by less expensive teachers or retire even mid-year. So we believe, and history has shown us, that our salaries will typically come in lower because of that attrition. Does that make sense? Less expensive to hire a new teacher versus an old teacher, but everybody is in the budget today, whether they're retiring or not, because we don't know. But we're going to project that people are going to. Okay. So after all that, I just presented $1.4 million worth of budget reductions to the committee. That leaves $228,000 of extra. One of the items on here is not extra. One of the items on here is an extra. So we would be recommending, staff would be recommending that the board consider a one-time small tool refresh in transportation, maintenance, grounds, and custodial. It is really common in the school environment to receive new computers or new office equipment on a regular cycle. It has been some time, and I think the messaging from the USW was pretty clear around some of the condition of that equipment. This is a one-time use of surplus, not intended to be a continuing structural item in the budget, but we're putting that in as the only ask in the budget, based on all the information that I know the board has collected.
May I say thank you for that? I know when the plant chair presented to the budget committee, she was very understanding that we were in a position and just asked for something, whether it was a tool, like she was asking just for small things. So for us to be able to look at $100,000 worth of refresh, I think that's really important, and I think that'll go a long way. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
The other item, is that housekeeping item that I mentioned at the start. If I had put it in the budget position originally, we would have been $300,000 different. So that is the ICY. We had $300,000 in the budget. I've added $429,000. We need to add the balance of the integrated child and youth care team into the budget.
Justin, fine. The last one, integrated child and youth care. That's a project that Gordon Lee and I are working on that we'll be presenting somewhere down the road. We did attend a 2-day workshop with RCY in Vancouver.
Oh, okay. Well, we have the ICY team is with the district.
Right now we have 2 counselors, 1 peer support, and we're working on hiring our 2nd peer support.
Trustee Sousa, then Trustee Strachan.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm still not understanding, like, 128,000, is like, what's that a percentage of? Like, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah. There's 2,000 lines in the budget. I'll start there. One line either needed to have been taken out to create the opening balancing position, or the revenues and the balance of the expenditures needed to have been put in. There's a $429,000 budget associated with ICY. That revenue has been brought now into the budget. We already had $300,000 of the expenses in, but not the revenue, and we need to top up the balance of the expenditures in the program. I'm basically saying that if I didn't pick it up, if I had picked it up, I would have come to the board with a $3.6 million shortfall. And now it needs to come into the budget. So I'm grabbing the revenue and the expenditures to fully balance that program. Okay? So then after, it was a find later on in a deep review on the supply line items in the tables this weekend.
It's going out. Trustee Strachan.
So you have about 16 areas that you've looked to make up that difference, or give or take?
20 notes.
20, sorry, that was right in front of me. So that being said, I think I asked this question last year, is do you try not to go to the same well all the time? I thought last year we also found some room in the Indigenous education enhancements. No?
No.
Are any of these a duplicate from last year?
Sometimes average teacher salary is just
I
because
thought that was
because it flips, and usually surplus is.
Okay.
Those would be the only examples here. You know, other years we had interest revenue that was increasing that we went to. There's other years where we made adjust International Student Program for projected growth on the revenue side. We might look at rentals when there was a significant rental to the CSF, for instance, when those things tend to get added. But no, most of these are not so staffing oriented, like related this time, and often they're FTE. There are implications. We do have a little bit of custodial, and I did say we had to already took down the budget already for declining enrollment on teachers and EAs, and but no, these are pretty much mostly new, and they're going back to the list of add-ons that the board have put in over the last number of years. When times were better.
Does that include that first big ticket one, 468,000?
That's the first time we looked at that.
I was going to say, I was wondering about
That's a newbie.
Okay, that's a lot of money, but it's not something you're doing every year, so.
No, I think it's one that has always really been at the board's discretion around what those local rates are, but you need a good reason to have to do it, and there needed to be enough financial pressure to make that move on those to actually have an argument to government that we had to do this to balance the budget.
So then my follow-up question to that is, if you predict that next year's going to be worse, do you leave yourself some wiggle room with that, or do you go all in now?
You'll see, it's coming up.
Okay.
Hang on, we got our projections.
Good, thanks.
Trustee Sousa?
Thanks. So I'm just going back to Pro-D. So Vista doesn't come under that, attending Vista. No, that's a separate, okay.
No, trustees have always been able to budget for attending all the regular conferences and activities like Vista and BCSDA, AGM, and then the Pro-D sessions. This was an add-on that came out of a motion of the board a number of years ago.
I don't know, how many years ago.
I think probably 4 or 5 years ago. It just hasn't been utilized. It was to create an opportunity to attend, maybe potentially go to a national conference or something along that. So that for the committee does bring us to a potential balanced budget before you. And I'll move on to the rest of my presentation now, which, we have a question from Trustee Kraft.
I'm still not clear on if we are looking at adjusting, just hang on, Trustee Kraft, we are getting to that. She wants to know for adjusting the add-ons for inclusive learning supports for 20, so basically the stuff the trustees added. It's coming, Trustee Kraft.
This very slide, the next slide. The recommended adjustments were compiled considering Beyond Education Strategic Plan 2530 and Administrative Procedure 412 periods of diminishing financial resources. That's why I spent that time on the two priorities at the beginning. These proposals do not at all go into the mental health support levels that were set in 24-25, or the assessments or additional inclusive education support levels that were in the 24-25 budget.
So to be clear, the additions that the board put on are still there.
In those areas. That is, we heard pretty clearly, I shouldn't say we, I believe the board heard, and I was present from almost every group around the priorities in those areas in their budget liaison. So we're not making recommendations on those add-ons that have been part of the previous budgets. It would be complex to increase those, given the financial situation and what I'm going to show you on the future.
For this next budget, we will be able to maintain those?
They are currently at their current levels in the 25-26 budget, and I thought it was important to note that because I knew how important those were to the board to know that.
Thank you.
So this is a surplus slide. Where are we at? I've been talking about after we did the amended budget, there was $3.9 million remaining in unallocated surplus. You may remember that from a month ago or 2 months ago. I brought the board a surplus projection of 1.12 million at the board meeting last week. Do we remember that? Which means that I was projecting at the board meeting last week that the board would have 5.1 million in surplus. That 1.12 as of today is still very solid, and we're moving closer and closer to the end of the school year. So I'm feeling more and more confident in the absenteeism trends, in the wage trends, in the utility trends, those really big variables that we're on target for that surplus. And that surplus, as I mentioned last week, does not yet include what I think to be a better than February count, like a better than what projected February count on the student enrollment that we claim in that month. So I think it could only, I put myself out there to say I believe it's going to go up, not down. But utilizing the number that was presented, if the board accesses 2.354 million, you have $2.5 million of contingency. You have a target of 1 to 3. Any questions on that? That's where you sit. And that's what I say right here. In the next slide, it's 2.5% budget. Okay. This slide shows you what you've used over the years. Blue is surplus used to balance budget, and orange is what has been remaining. So you can go back in time and see when less surplus was used, but there was less surplus to use, and times when more surplus was used than this year, but there was more to use too. Like back in the 2020-2021 COVID year, the board came out of that COVID year with substantial surplus, like just from the grants that had come in and the ability to manage budgets in that time, and the fact that nobody was meeting or traveling anywhere. So I don't think your trend pattern here is too out of line with the last 4 years around utilization of surplus. I wanted just to show you that history. Okay, there's always risk. And we just talked about the risk a little bit with Trustee Souza around what about absenteeism and could you go further? The board could, but there's risks involved with some of those estimates. There's, I always use this one. We budget for hydro, we budget for the increases that we know in the rates, but it could be a cold winter, it could be a warm winter. We budget for absenteeism, but you might get an H1N1 or an H2N3 or another COVID, and it's all over at that point, and that is why you have a contingency. Your contingency policy states that's for unknowns. And I also believe in being over-conservative in a budget. You often will take cuts or out of areas that then might present themselves as learning risk, where maybe you had too much contingency built in and you weren't able to deliver the right services to the kids. So it's a balance between not wanting to ever be in a deficit situation. We certainly don't budget for large surpluses, things happen. But trying to make sure that not purposely budgeting for too much contingency, or you've not put services in for the learners. That's a really difficult balance. So I want to go quickly through 2 special purpose funds. Classroom Enhancement Fund overhead and Community Link. Because these have a bit of discretion of the board. I talked a bit about this early on one of the concepts, but there's preliminary, there's $9 million for teacher wages through the Classroom Enhancement Fund. So that's a lot. I think that is where the district's class size and composition language really, as complex as it is to manage and manage remedy, that's $9 million of teachers you wouldn't have if the collective agreement hadn't got restored. So that is smaller class sizes. But the part I want to talk about is the overhead funding in the Classroom Enhancement Fund of $1 million. So the board has some discretion in this, and it's used for Pro-D, it's used for the teacher absenteeism, it's used for extra EAs because you can't combine them in classrooms in the same way, it's used for human resources support. So we're not recommending a lot of change here. taking that budget, rolling it forward, and basically status quo around one position in HR, 5.692 education assistants, and then the rest of the budget just remaining exactly as it was. Community Link is another fund, $768,000 available. It is being used for itinerant behavior intervention workers, student support workers, and funding for early years clerical support, which also supports the child care program. And this is a little bit different this year, where last year we were budgeting to think that there was going to be a coordinator come out of this budget, and that actually didn't end up happening. So this year we're budgeting for a single clerical position, and all of those funds that were for that coordinator are now moving down into those supports that would be for EAs, student support workers, and intensive behavior workers. So an increase in FTE in those workers from 7.2 to 10.23. And there may be surplus here as well. You know, Community Link is an account that often surpluses and can provide supports, additional supports out of those surpluses, and we'll be working with the Inclusive Education Department on how to utilize those best. Okay. There's a Learning Improvement Fund that we'll be bringing you a budget on. It's slightly down from last year, and that's due to the percentage of enrollment that this board has over the total in the province. But it provides basically 1 hour a week for every EA to do collaboration work. And then the AFG budget is another budget you're familiar with. It's $2.45 million. It's pretty much status quo of the year before. Feeding Futures is down. It was over $1 million, but we get a percentage of the total pot in the province, and the Cowichan Valley School District is getting a slightly smaller percentage every year of overall student population. But it's going to be supplemented by the National School Food Program, which I think may actually come in before the end of this year. I note it here. I'll have to sort that out before we budget for it, but I think there's a multi-year commitment by the federal government to support food programming, and so that will be utilized as well for nutritious school meals. Okay. This is kind of the last part, so thank you for staying with me through all this information. I know I've given you a lot. Multi-year budget planning. So some of the questions have come up. What does this mean as we look out? So we have to do a lot of assumptions. One of them is around student enrollment. I'm going to show you a revision I did to that this weekend shortly. Staffing levels. So based on your enrollment, how many teachers are going to be in the budget? If you think there's going to be any differences in any of the designations, how many EAs are going to be in the budget? Projected salary increases, we don't have those right now, but often when I do this modeling, we have that already figured out. The government has told us what is going to be in the bargain framework, or it's already been bargained in collective agreements, and then I try to figure out, well, how much money are we going to get for that? Kind of actually easier this time. I'm just using the same per pupil rate because they're not funding inflation and there's no wages up this time. Future surplus deficit generation, do we assume that we'll always be generating a surplus? Multi-year initiatives, one-time initiatives. This budget that I've proposed, or we have proposed as a collectively this evening, does have a one-timer in the tools, so we factor those out. So I made assumptions around the grant, around wage increases, benefit increases, and surplus utilization. I have assumed 0% of wage increases in this budget because we just don't know what's happening at the provincial table. And 2% on inflation stabilization, which could be completely out of line given economic uncertainties. But these are assumptions. And it isn't, I don't have a crystal ball. I revised, based on all that provincial information that I shared with the board around immigration trends, out-migration from British Columbia, what we experienced here in this district this year with families leaving that we didn't know were going to leave. I revised the enrollment projections to basically take the Beauregard data, and it just assumed there's still some minimal in-migration. So not that growth is zero and people moving here, but that it's not at the trend patterns of the past. And when you do that, it really does change the way the future looks. So it starts to show about 150 to 200 student decline each year, which is where we've been, which is what I'm trying to show you here. We've lived it. We go back to 2000, and those numbers are 200 to 300 students a year. It bottomed out around 14, 15. It went up nicely again, and it's trending the other direction. So I think, we know why. We will just say it's out-migration. We don't have 100% graduation rate. We have small numbers coming in from birth rates. And the immigration caps, federal immigration cap limits have changed. And many of the individuals that are here are non-permanent residents and may not be here from the last 3 years of growth permanently. So I've used these new projections in the financial projections. That's why I've shared these. So a lot of work goes into this. But basically, where we vary on the revenues is I recalculate the grant on new enrollment and assume the board's going to be in funding protection for the next 2 years after this year. And you can see the grant go down from 94.8 million to 92.8 million to 91.4 million. And then on wages, teachers, I correspondingly take them out at the same rate, basically a 1-to-20 ratio. That we're declining in enrollment. So if there's going to be 200 students down in the projection, then the board's going to likely have 10 fewer teachers. And I project that. And then I look at benefits. And you can see on the benefit line, it's gone from 26.03% to 26.42 to 26.82. Everything we know about those benefit programs, the health benefit programs, is telling us that they're being seriously affected by inflation. That's why the board has another $600,000 in benefit costs this year. And I get a total salaries and benefits. And then I do the same on services and supplies. I add in 2%, just assuming that everything's going to cost that in the next couple of years. And you can see this year in the center column, right bullseye in that document, where there's $2.354 million being used to balance the budget. That's this year. We don't know what the future is going to look like, but if we have those inflationary pressures next year and no funding, assume that could be potentially looking for 3.5 and 4.5. And again, that's assuming that everything has inflation applied to it at the same rate. So large assumptions made, no crystal ball, but every year it just seems like the next year is the one that's going to be manageable, and the one after, like we're sort of coming to that time frame where things are going to get tougher unless something changes in the way we're funded. But if the province does end up not affecting the overall education budget and enrollment does drop in the province, they would have an opportunity to adjust the per pupil rate because there'd be fewer students divided into the pod. Whether they do that or not, we don't know. Again, no crystal ball. This is just a forecasting document, but it's basically saying probably next year, okay, but maybe not so much. So where are we at? You've seen some options to a potential balanced budget. I've shown you surplus. I've shown you forecasting. We've had them in great detail. We do have an April 22nd meeting. We can go through it all again, or we can come back to the board with a balanced budget at that time. Depends on how much more deliberation you want, or whether you believe you may be ready to cancel the April 29th meeting, or whether you would like to keep the April 29th meeting. But we can come with a balanced budget. We're not usually in a balanced budget situation at this time with a recommendation. The board may have other items they want to further discuss. Sometimes you choose to have a board planning session where you want to get a little bit deeper into understanding the options. But the goal is still to bring the balanced budget to the board on May the 6th and begin staffing on May the 7th. So like I said, I think we because of the time frame between now and April 22nd, we could actually build the bylaw on this, and you could tweak it at that time, or be ready to move it forward to the board at that time.
All right, trustees. So what we know is that everything we added is protected, safe. I think we all know that we had to maintain this year without adding. So the choice is ours. If we have consensus that we figured that looks pretty good, don't forget, we will still debate this in public at the open board meeting when we pass the budget. But are you feeling comfortable enough for us to ask the Secretary Treasurer and Assistant Secretary Treasurer and team to build the budget bylaw for the BEBC meeting, the regular BEBC meeting, and for us to send it to the table for May 6th? Or do you believe that we're going to need another meeting to discuss this? So I'll just start with Joe.
I'm satisfied.
Sorry, that was trustee Thorne. Trustee Elise?
Absolutely satisfied, and if I may, I just am gobsmacked at how you can take such a complex system and tell a story the way you do. It's brilliant, so thank you. Such incredible work all across the board.
Trustee Souza?
Thanks. I am satisfied with this and think it's a lot of work and it's very clear and very much appreciated. I guess I have a question around like initiatives that are in development, like the climate action plan, for example, right? Like it's kind of falling in between right now, and it's great that the 20,000 is still there, in terms of passion projects and whatnot, but we don't know yet, like in terms of, the committee's going to meet a couple more times, and then it's like costing out some of these things, like it's just in a different sort of stage. So how do you work with something like that, like when it's kind of in between budget cycles?
Mr. Sanquist?
I think what's important to remember with budgeting is to set a point in time. Our budget is dynamic, and honestly, the board sees it at a couple points in time during the year, but staff see the changes on a daily basis. And boards have opportunities to look at revenue sources or look at changes in projections, and should the board wish to look at climate initiatives, and should the surplus be higher, or should they be one time, or should they be continuing? There is an amended budget that comes before the board in February, and there is that opportunity. There's still, a fair bit of uncertainty around what is the enrollment going to look like. Like I mentioned, there's a $500,000 contingency in staffing. There's lots of questions. But the budget is an adopted plan, a spending plan for delivery of the services of the board into the next fiscal year at a point in time.
Trustee Second? Yeah, no, I got it.
Yeah, I'm comfortable. I can't remember it being so significant last year. I'm trying to remember what the heck that was last year that put us at 4.4 deficit. What was it?
Oh, it's because, sorry, I gotta go back on my slides here.
Like this seems, even though it's bad.
Utilization of surplus? Oh, it's because the rollover goes into that budget. It's the amended budget.
Oh, okay.
And there are the restrictions from the previous year. It was actually 2.9.
Okay, yes.
Of surplus utilized unrestricted, but it gets blended and kind of confusing.
Okay.
And then we don't budget for rollover into the annual. It comes on the amended. So anything, it's like having a credit card bill that's due the next month.
Yeah, well and have you factored that into these scary numbers that we're seeing?
No, because it's those things that are unspent in surplus they're not part of my surplus projection to begin with.
Okay.
For instance, my surplus projection doesn't include any savings on in-service. I'm just assuming it's going to be fully spent, but there's certain components of that are required to be rolled over into the next year.
Okay.
And so they get budgeted for at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Trustee Strachan, are you agreeing with the budget bylaw? Before I get to Trustee Croft, I'd just like to say thank you to you and your team, and to senior management team for coming together and being so thoughtful in where you are putting the takeaways. And I know this was a lot of work, and I appreciate the time. I had a community member tell me that they drove by the board office on Saturday and saw that you were here working and saw a white car, so I'm assuming that would be Clyde over there. So I just want to say thank you for the extra time that you guys put in to make sure that this came to the board. I think it's a very thoughtful budget. And so I too am going to be okay with us seeing a budget bylaw at the BEBC meeting to recommend to the board. Trustee Croft is apparently going to attempt to speak. So Trustee Croft.
Well, this is my getting over my cold voice. I hope it's not too horrible. I have a couple of comments, and first of all, yes, absolutely. This is ready for prime time, ready for the bylaw. Just want to make a comment that I thought that the reductions were really thoughtful. It was really nice that we didn't have to go and empty out any line item in its entirety. But I am aware that, I am aware that I think it will be felt. I think it'll be felt as little as it possibly could be, but I think people will still notice but we are certainly holding up our end of things. And I guess I just want to refer back to Trustee Souza's question about climate action budget. I would actually see the budget for actions taken on that would be in our operations and capital, and there's an awful lot of line items. Would that not be spread over those line items in the final analysis?
It really depends on the recommendation. Some of capital nature, that would be, the committee may come to the board and say, we have X number of dollars of local capital, and the board could say, well, we would spend some of that on those initiatives if it's something of capital nature. If it's operating, I think those other budgets are getting pretty stretched. We would probably be looking at amendments if there was an operating component.
Sorry, may I clarify, Madam Chair? I didn't mean into this budget. I'm just saying that the items that I see under climate action are actually don't belong in a climate action line item, but the types of actions that are being taken would actually be attributed to different upgrades and different line items. So when the time comes.
Yes. Thank you, Trustee Croft. I also want to tell you I had a quick conversation with Trustee Dillman, and I just kind of went over some of the notes with him, and he trusted that this was a good process, and he will support us moving this to regular BEBC for a bylaw. And chances are that he might be able to be with us in Zoom at that point in time. So, so thank you very much once again for everybody's patience and going through a very long budget presentation, but I think this has been excellent. So thank you.
In a hot room on a hot topic.
All right. So with no further business, because there's nothing in policy, motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Trustee Souza, seconded by Trustee Lise. All those in favor. Thank you, Trustee Croft, for coming in offline.